Hi, everyone, and thanks for hanging out in the kitchen with me again today. It's a special spot for me because when I'm in the restaurants, of course, we're all decked out with, well, we look like surgeons a lot. We've got our masks and we've got our gloves and we have heavy overcoats as well. So we've got all kinds of stuff that protect us from one another, from all the possible contagions from outside. But then I get to come up here and take all that off and just cook with you like I would cook in my own home. So today it's all about a tortilla soup. I figured that, well, today in Chicago it looks like snow is coming down, not what I usually expect in April, but there's nothing better than a heartwarming soup on a day like today, overcast and, well, with some precipitation. We hope it doesn't stay as snow most of the day. Okay, so I'm going to start off here by doing the flavoring base that you would find in most Mexican soups and probably most soups around the world. Onions are something that is just always used, it seems to me, because onions, they cook up, they're very aromatic, and they cook up to a lovely sweetness. That extra little bit of sweetness in the broth is exactly what we're looking for them to contribute. Now, there's the classic mirepoix that is used in French cooking, and that would have onions and celery and a little bit of carrot. That fire is kind of high there for that. But I want to get these to brown nicely. If you've had classic training, you know that you would sweat your mirepoix ingredients. Sweat is the word that they use for that because it's cooking them over a low fire, usually with butter, not with olive oil like I'm using here. And you would let them cook slowly, and you don't want to get any color on them usually unless you're making a brown stock. Well, I'm going to make a kind of brown soup here, and I'm going to go at this in a way that is going to bring some rich color from these onions. Now you notice that I kind of slice them. They're not very finely sliced here, and that's because I'm going to blend them once they get soft. But while we're waiting for those to brown, now I'm going to open up a couple of cloves of garlic. I think maybe 3 of them here. You'll notice in Mexican broths that there's rarely any of the carrot and the onion used. Those actually do contribute a fairly strong flavor, and it's not a flavor that is really prized in the Mexican kitchen. You will find some chefs, obviously, that have had that classic French training that do use the mirepoix ingredients, but I think it gives a different kind of flavor to the stock. Usually when we're talking about a soup stock in Mexico, we are going to be adding a lot of other flavors to it, and we don't need to get everything just out of the mirepoix ingredients flavor in there, so that's one of the reasons. Now, I'm peeling off the papery husks of these after having smashed them. They're not coming off very easily, partly because this garlic has been in our refrigerator. You'll notice that some of my ingredients that I'm using are looking a little bit shop worn right now, and that's because, you know, we're just open for takeout and carry out and delivery, and so we don't. Some of the stuff that's been left in our walk-in, I'm trying to use it up in everything that I can think to use it up in, but it's not on our menu for the pickup and delivery. Okay, so that's getting brown nicely there. But when you find this garlic sprouting like this with the green on there, you can open it up like that and take that kernel out of the middle of it. And that will give you, this stuff is usually fairly indigestible. Once you cook it, I don't think it's that bad, but you could have that for your garlic and just pitch the green part of it there. And now I'm going to throw in these, I basically halved the garlic as I was pulling out the sprouted parts there. And we're going to let those cook in here. Now while that's finishing its cooking, the onion is softening nicely, we're going to talk about what makes tortilla soup really special. Now, all over Mexico, they cook tortilla soup differently. If you're out in the Yucatan Peninsula, they will call it sopa de lima because it's simple chicken broth without the chili flavor in it, and it's made incredibly aromatic by something that they call lima agria. So lima agria is very perfumey, a little bit perfumey like kaffir lime leaves, if you've ever used those in Southeast Asian cooking, really delicious thing. In northern part of Mexico, they're not going to season it much like the way that I'm going to season it here. I'm showing you the central Mexican style of tortilla soup, and it is really defined by this dried chili. This is called a pasilla chili. Now, if you don't have this or don't live near a Mexican grocery store where you can find a beautiful pasilla chili like this, it's a dried version of what's called a chilaca when it's fresh. Then you can replace it. Well, there's lots of different directions you could go. You could replace it with ancho chili if you have access to ancho chilies. You could take a little bit of that, the canned chipotles that I've used before and add the smoky spiciness of that. But I'm going to show you this classic one. We haven't worked with dried chilies very much, and this is a great place for you to start. First of all, you're looking for pasillas that are that flexible. When you smell them, they should smell sort of like spicy prunes because this is a dried fruit, technically. You'll pull off the stem end of it like that, and then I'm going to open it up just using my knife here. You could tear it open if you wanted to, but you can also use a knife to cut it down the side, and then you can open it. I'm just going to do it that far, and then see, it doesn't tear very easily. And then I'm going to shake out all these seeds here. Now, this is the flavor that sometimes we refer to as a little bit chocolatey, a little kind of bitter chocolate flavor that you'll get in this one. Here are those veins. Now, if you want it to be less spicy, then you would pull out the veins like that. If your hands are sensitive, you would be doing this with some sort of latex gloves on. Get all of those seeds out there. And then we're going to go over here to a pan that is ungreased. This is done, toasting is dry. And I'm going to flatten it out like that, press it down. And then you see little tiny wisps of smoke come there. You remember how dark it was on that inside. Now I flip it over and it's lightened up in color. And that's what we want. Another few seconds on the other side till maybe you see that tiny little wisp of smoke. And this will really, really allow the chili flavor to blossom here. Now I'm going to bring my compost bowl over here and get rid of all of the seeds and the veins in the top of that chili that I pulled off of there. And then as this now cools off, it will start to get a little crispy, but it won't get completely crispy. I'm going to tear it into smaller pieces, and then I'm going to throw them into the blender jar, and I'm going to combine them with the contents of this pan here. So I'm going to take the browned onions and garlic, halves of garlic there, scraping them in here, but leaving as much oil back in the pan as I possibly can. Put that back over the heat there. Open a can of fire roasted tomatoes, or you could roast fresh tomatoes like I've shown you in some of these other kitchen hangouts. And I will just put that in here, and we're going to make a puree out of that. So I'm going to turn this on and get it started. Okay. You'll notice it'll get darker as it starts blending because that chili is sometimes called chile negro because it almost looks jet black. If I were to rehydrate it, it would be a kind of chocolate brown color. One of the few brown chilies. Many of the other ones will turn red, a dark red when you rehydrate them. So look at what we've got there. You can see that beautiful color. I'm going to just turn it on high for a second. Now, with most home blenders that don't have the power of this, you may find little pieces of that dried chili in there, in which case you probably want to put it through a medium mesh sieve, one of these guys that I have hanging over here. Nothing fancy, just a kind of medium mesh sieve like that, and you can put it through there. This is a high-speed blender, and when I put it on high, it's going to really, really pulverize this stuff. I need to put just a little bit more oil in this pan because I can see that there is not enough to coat the whole thing. And then I want to make sure to hear that sizzle, so I can hear the sizzle. Put this mixture in. And then we're going to let this cook down until it's thick and reduced. Okay, so at this point, I think I can turn my fire up a little bit to be able to reduce this really, really quickly. And we want to cook it until it has reduced almost to that consistency of tomato paste. We'll keep checking on that. I'll get rid of this guy over here. Now let's talk about this broth that I'm using for this, okay? So what I have here is a rich chicken broth. It is made in that classic Mexican way where it has onions, a little bit of garlic, and that's all. And we don't make it real, we make it cloudy, okay? Which means that we are really working with this broth simmering for a long time, and we're not doing lots of skimming and that sort of stuff. This is sort of like, I'm going to call it full-bodied chicken stock that is not trying to be fancy at all. And it is that kind of beautiful richness that I associate the most with great chicken broth, especially in Mexico. Now, there's a different flavor when you eat it in Mexico, especially if you're out in the countryside and you see the chickens running around and you know that that is what has gone into the broth. And those free-range chickens will have an incredibly delicious flavor. So my encouragement to you is when you're making chicken stock, should you be making it yourself and not buying some from the grocery store, that you use free-range chickens because they will typically have a better flavor. I was in Mexico a couple of years ago at Christmas. We spend every Christmas in Oaxaca, and I ate rice cooked with this amazing stock made from free-range chickens, and to me, it was the best rice I have ever had in my entire life, and it was because it was made from a really, really delicious chicken. So think about that if you're going to go to all of the effort to make the chicken stock yourself. If you have an Instant Pot, man, it is so simple. 1 hour, and you can have absolutely the best chicken stock that you could ever imagine. So if you're one of fans of the Instant Pot, as I am, then that's the way I make all of my broths at home because I can do it so quickly. No more 4, 5, 6 hours on the back of the stove. Okay, so this is cooked down now that I can see. Come on in and look and see. You can see how I can see the bottom of the pot as I'm stirring through it there. And it's gotten really super thick. That is the stage that is super important with this because that's where all of those flavors will come together, and the flavor of that pasilla chili will really infuse this broth here. Okay, so I'm going to turn that one off and turn this guy. I need to get it up to a boil, so I'm going to put this. I went ahead and warmed this broth. You don't have to have warm broth for this. But I warmed it just so that it would come to a simmer quickly. I just put it in the microwave for a few minutes and warmed it up. And look at how beautiful that is. And what you're getting for the aroma of it is all the flavors of the tomato, the sweetness of the onion, that sort of robust flavor, I will say, of the pasilla chili or the pasilla negro chili. That broth that I was using didn't have any salt in it at all, so I'm going to salt the broth here. I'll give it a first pass at salt. Stir that. Again, the reason that I use this fine ground sea salt is because it dissolves instantly in whatever you put it in. If you were using something that's more coarse, a type of coarse sea salt, then you would have to wait to taste it for maybe probably 5 minutes, and because it will possibly take that long for all of that salt to dissolve in there. I'm going to give it a taste just to see where we are. Needs a little bit more salt later on, but I'm just going to let that cook. Man, the flavors of that chili, it's really wonderful stuff. Okay, so let's go over here and talk about the herb that's going to go in here. Because if I'm making a classic Mexico City style sopa de tortilla, or sometimes called a sopa azteca, an Aztec, I don't know why Aztec style, but it's Aztec style, they would always put epazote in here. Now you'll notice that all I have is some epazote leaves here, and they're starting to look a little shop-worn for sure. This is all the epazote we had in the house, so I kind of picked through it. It's okay if the leaves are a little bit withered going into the soup like this, but usually you would put a great big sprig, shall we call it, it's got a fairly hefty stem on it. You'd put a whole sprig of it in here and let it simmer in the soup. Now, if you've never worked with epazote before, its flavor, it's one of those, I call it sort of like a bitter herb. The first time I tasted rosemary, I wasn't really wild about it because I thought it was too piney. I thought it was like, wow, that's going to really affect the flavor of the food in a negative way. And if you put too much rosemary in a dish, it can really affect it in a negative way. However, a little bit of rosemary goes beautifully with so many things. The first time I tasted epazote, I thought it was kind of horrific. Slightly petroleum-like, really robust in its flavor. And then I moved to Mexico, started tasting it constantly in the beans. So in the black beans, they almost always cook the black beans with epazote. And the reason that they do that is that it balances the natural sweet flavor that you find in those black beans. So you've got the black beans adding sweetness, a little bit of onion sort of underscoring that, perhaps richness coming from a little of that high heat rendered pork lard, and then you get the epazote to balance all of that. So it's a more pungent herb. But once you get used to it, when you taste black beans that are not cooked with them, all you can taste is sweet. So if you happen to find epazote in a local Mexican market, please get some, cook it with your beans, or put it into a tortilla soup like this, and you will have something that will be very, very memorable, hopefully for all the right reasons. Now, when you go into the Mexican market and you ask for epazote, you only ask for it in the produce section where you would find parsley and cilantro. That's where you want to find it. They will also have it in the medicinal herb section, but in the medicinal herb section, because it's a tonic for your stomach as well, that in the medicinal herbs, it will be mostly stems. And the stems, while they're good for medicinal purposes, are not good for cooking. They just don't add any flavor to it. It'll add nothing but bitterness to the dish. So I always say, if you can't find any epazote, I would put either just a big handful of cilantro. I don't know if you've ever cooked with cilantro like that before, but I would tie a bunch of it together and put it down in here. It's going to add a sweetness that's going to be really lovely. It's kind of an herbal sweetness. Doesn't taste very much like cilantro when you put a whole bunch of it in there and you simmer it with the soup, but I think that you'll really like that flavor. But if you can find epazote, my encouragement to you is that you use it. Okay, so that's the end of my epazote here in my little bag of herbs here. Some people were asking me last week, why did I do this and not put it into a glass of water and then put it in the refrigerator? It's because leaves of everything don't do well in the dryness of a refrigerator. A refrigerator is really dry. So I just take a piece of, a doubled up piece of paper towel like this. I wet it, I wring it out, spread it out, and then lay all of my herbs on that, and then roll it up jelly roll style, put it into a bag, and I keep it in the vegetable bin of the refrigerator, and that it'll last for usually about a week or two, depending on how fresh the product is when you get it. Okay, so we're ready to start building this. Let's talk about all of the other ingredients that are going to go in here. So classically, this could be made with one of two types of cheese. In Mexico City, typically they will cube queso fresco. Now, if you don't know anything about queso fresco, just imagine it this way. If you've had cottage cheese before that doesn't have any cream on it, that's kind of what queso fresco is. It's packed into a hoop, and then you can it's packed it really tightly, and then you can kind of cut it into small squares and put that into the soup. It's a very fresh cheese, and it's super, super. But most of us are used to turning the soup down now that it's come to a boil. Most of us are used to a melting cheese in here, and I really love the melting cheese. It's just gooey and fun and reminds you a little bit of French onion soup, which we all love for the gooiness of the French onion soup. So I'm going to put Actually, I'm going to take all of this chicken, which is already cooked. You can make this with raw chicken too. You would put it in now and just let it poach for the next 10 minutes or so. In our restaurant, we always have poached chicken tenders. You know, the part, I showed it to you when we were working with making the chicken in escabeche recipe, that I pulled the chicken tenders out of the chicken breasts. And we save those tenders to use for pulled chicken. You can make great tacos out of it. You can put it in soup. And then you have a beautiful chicken breast without that piece on the side of it. So these are just poached. So I'm just wanting these to get warmed up now in this soup. So I'm going to just put a couple handfuls of those in there. And then I'm going to put into our bowl here a little bit of cheese. Now let's talk about what the cheese would be. In Mexico, the cheese, if you're really going to the very best stuff, you'll probably get real Chihuahua cheese. Now, real Chihuahua cheese is made by the Mennonites that immigrated over a century ago into northern Mexico, and they started making this wonderful cheese. The official name for that cheese is a Cheshire-style cheese. It reminds me a little bit of a cross between, say, Colby Jack and light cheddar. And if you get it made by the Mennonites, it's beautiful. It will be cloth bound, waxed. It will be an absolutely delicious cheese that melts beautifully in the soup. But not very many people have the access to it, or nor can they afford it, because it's a very expensive cheese. So what they would put in here is something they would call Mexican Manchego. Think sort of Colby or something like that. It's just a simple cheese. What I've put in here is a mixture of Colby and Jack that is made by an Amish farmer south of Chicago, and it's the only melting cheese that we use in our restaurant. He's got his own herd of cattle, and he milks them every day, and he makes this beautiful cheese. It's an unpasteurized cheese, but then it is allowed to ripen over the 60 days that are necessary for that, but it's just a delight. It's so beautiful, and even though it's a simple cheese, it's a really, really well-made simple cheese. Next thing that we need to talk about are the fried tortillas that typically go in this, and this, of course, is the part that everybody really loves. This is the defining element of a good tortilla soup, and you could just take some fried chips or a bag of chips and just break them up into pieces to go in here. I don't think the whole piece of the tortilla chip is probably the right thing, because I like to get lots of little smaller pieces in each bite instead of trying to fish out the whole tortilla chips. Put as much or as little of this. If you eat this, this is like a definitive thing that you'll find in Frontera Grill, Topolobampo, and Xoco. And we serve it in all of them, slightly different versions of it in all of them, but always with the pasilla chili and the epazote in it. And we do something different with the tortillas in each one. They're all fried, but they may be in strips, they may be super rustic like this, or they may be in fine angel hair, but so there's lots of room to play around here. The last thing that we're going to put on here is avocado. So I have an avocado that is ripe. I remember I told you that this is the place that it needs to give, is the bulbous end there. So I'm going to go around the avocado pit and then twist the two sides apart. That one's not in the best of shape, I'll say. So I'm going to just pull out a little bit of the darkness here, get rid of that over into the compost bowl, and then scoop out what is here and make that into some slices or dices, whatever you prefer. I think on this one it might be nice to do some pretty slices. So we'll cut a few of those guys. Last seasoning now for our soup. Yeah, even from the first taste that I made to this taste, the salt has come out more. So that's why I waited to add the final to it there. And we'll stir that all around. I'm going to put it into it. This is a hearty soup, so it's something that you want to serve in a large bowl. This can easily become dinner. So I'm going to put some of it in here. We've got, oh, that's beautiful. We have, oh man, does that smell good? the tortilla strips are really interesting, or the tortilla pieces that are in there are really interesting because they become really aromatic when you pour the broth over the top of them. I'm going to lay these guys over the top here. I think I need to do a different, that's prettier, like that. Then I'm going to just lay a couple more of these guys sort of over the top of this for prettiness. I want to have just a little bit, another ingredient that you could put in here that a lot of people really love is a spoonful of Mexican crema or creme fraiche, or you could just use a little bit of sour cream that has been thinned out just a little bit with some milk or cream. And then I'm just going to lay a few of these cilantro leaves. So you don't have to do that. I just think it'll look really pretty here over the top of it. And I will tell you, it smells so aromatic, so delicious smelling that I can't wait to dig into that big bowl there of classic Mexico City style tortilla soup. I hope that you'll tackle this and it'll bring great joy to you. Thank you so much for hanging out in the kitchen with me today. And I'll be back again at 1 o'clock Central Time tomorrow. The recipe will be posted in about an hour.